This podcast is part of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Podcast Network. Go to michigansportsandentertainment.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to MSE Countdown with your host, David Rosenberg and Chase Sussex. The countdown starts now.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Countdown. I'm your host, David Rosenberg. We're back after a little bit, and I'm here with Chase Sussex. Chase, what's up?
Yo, what's going on, everybody?
It is football season, and I know that you and I have been waiting forever for this. So before we get into the Lions, what the Lions did today, what are your general thoughts on football being back? I mean, college football started. We've gone through 2 weeks of that, and we just got through our first real Sunday of jam-packed football games. And I don't know about you, but I was at a sports bar all day, drinking some beer, eating some wings, and watching some good football. How'd you enjoy this fine Sunday?
It was fantastic. I mean, it's been such a long time that we've seen football. The preseason wasn't the same, so having college football back this week and having NFL football back this week was fantastic. I got my new student discount going on my NFL Sunday ticket, so I'm raring to go this season. I've got 3 fantasy teams going, man. You have no idea how excited I am for this season, both for college and NFL football to be back. It's just an exciting time, and trust me, my weekends are pretty much glued in front of the television watching football. So,
we'll see how that goes. You're a college student now, Chase. We've been off the air for, I think, about a month, but we're back. A lot of things have gone on. I'm no longer a college student. I graduated from the University of Central Florida, Go Knights, this past August, and I'm, enjoying my graduate life. But you've now entered what I was living for the past 5 years. So how's college treating you?
College has been good. Living away from my parents for the first time. It's definitely a weird experience, but it's a lot of fun. I got a couple buddies I'm staying with, and I pretty much watch football with them all day. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be pretty much a tradition every weekend. So, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, as long as you can hang out with your friends up there, it should be a good time. I know college was a good time for me. So, all right, we've talked enough about ourselves. Let's talk about some football. The Lions, I know a lot of people are disappointed. They tied the Cardinals after they dominated most of the game, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, on all 3 phases of the game, both offense, defense, and coaching, the Lions controlled most of that football game. I mean, they looked good through, 3.5 quarters worth of football. Unfortunately, the ending wasn't necessarily how it went. But, I don't really have too many criticisms. I think we've kind of gone long enough in this show with, being disappointed with how things have been. And I think we just need to look at the positives from today's game and really just kind of look at the fact that, again, it's not really a loss, but, a tie was definitely interesting. It wasn't the outcome I don't think any of us were expecting. But definitely an interesting game just because, we saw a lot of new things. I mean, we saw Darrell Bevel's new offense. We saw the debut of Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. So I think it was definitely an interesting day, in Lions football. So I definitely think that we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we certainly do have a bunch of things to talk about, and you mentioned a couple good points that we're going to touch on in just a bit. But before we actually started recording, I sent you a text earlier today, and I said, Chase, I want you to have 3 stars ready by the end of the game, win or lose. Little did I know I didn't offer you the option of a tie, so I guess you could have weaseled your way out. But I assume you have 3 stars of the game today?
I do, yeah. So I do want to kind of point out, I think on offense there was very little wrong with what the Lions did today. So it's a little bit hard for me to pick players, but to avoid kind of stepping on each other's toes, because I know we both have players to pick, I'm going to kind of go through my good players this week. So on offense, my number 1 player was Danny Amendola. I think Amendola had a really good game, scored a touchdown, 47-yarder. It was the Detroit Lions' first touchdown of the NFL season. I think it was just really exciting. Someone like a veteran to come in like that. I think Danny Amendola has definitely become a fan favorite. Even upon his entrance in Detroit, he had that really cool video where he took off his hat and put on a Tigers hat, and it was just he's been a fan favorite since he came into Detroit. So for him to score the first NFL touchdown for the Lions this season was definitely impressive. He did have that little hiccup there at the end of the game where he, didn't run out of bounds, and that definitely cost the Lions some time. They had to waste their timeout on that because he didn't run out of bounds.
Yeah,
Definitely a
that
costly
that
play
was
there.
a big mistake late in the game that I know a lot of people were really upset about. But I'm glad that you picked him for your offensive star and didn't let that hold you back, because I think he did have a really good game other than that little blunder.
Yeah, there was so much good from that game that I saw. I'm really excited for what he can do during the season. I think he's one of those speedy sort of slot guys that the Lions haven't had since Golden Tate. You definitely saw it last season after Tate was that after they traded Tate, that they just lost that aspect on offense. So for them to have that kind of player in their offense is really good. I don't necessarily know if he'll be as elusive and be that big yards after catch kind of guy, but I think he'll definitely be a big piece in Detroit's offense this year, and kind of a sort of like a quick target for Matthew Stafford if he's if Jones or Galladay are covered down the field. He can look for a short, quick route to Amendola, and kind of bail him out there a little bit.
I mean, that's the Patriot way, isn't it? That's that's one of the big questions leading into the season surrounding the Lions. They're becoming more and more like a Patriot style of organizing their team, of playing. Obviously, Matt Patricia's very familiar with that system, so he would base it off of something like that. And I thought it was very refreshing to see him score that first touchdown of the season as kind of a nod to say, yeah, this is going to work. The tie says to me that this isn't doom, that there's a lot of things that they need to work on to perfect the system, but too many times we've seen a loss, right? And I think that Amendola touchdown, at least for me, gave me a bit of a smile on my face, and like, okay, football's back and they have a plan and they know what they want to do.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. And that's along the lines why I picked Amendola as my top player for this week on offense. Transitioning into defense, I'm going to have to go with Devon Kennard here on defense. He was all over Kyler Murray all day. I mean, Kyler Murray is definitely a fast quarterback. He's a speedy little guy, but Devon Kennard was constantly chasing him down in the backfield. I ended up having 3 sacks. And probably, he was always in pursuit of Kyler Murray in the backfield, and he just had a really good game. They use him really properly. He fits really well into Patricia's defense, and I think that's what they really like to see. I mean, 3 sacks for him is really good. He was probably the most explosive defensive player I saw there, at least on their linebacking core. He looked really good all game. I didn't have any complaints there. He played all 4 quarters. Definitely one of the best players and one of the most noticeable players, I think, on the defense out there.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I didn't exactly know his name per se going into this, but I think almost immediately I became familiar with him because he was one of the main reasons that Kyler Murray struggled so heavily in that first half, even into the third quarter. He was just put a lot of pressure, on that entire backfield. He really shined, and I think that's a really good pick.
Yeah, exactly. Because Kennard Kennard limited Kyler Murray pretty much all game. I think he only had 13 rushing yards the entire game, and that was one of my keys to the game, was the fact that they needed to contain Kyler Murray and can't let him run the ball. They couldn't allow him to run the football. So for him to be able to effectively contain Kyler Murray there was really good, and I think the Lions succeeded in that sense on defense.
Okay, well, now that you bring that up, you tweeted this out on our account at MSE Countdown on Twitter. If you don't follow, go ahead and give us a follow. But did I read correctly that Matthew Stafford outrushed Kyler Murray in this game?
Yeah, he actually did. I joked about it a little bit on Twitter. I said, who says Matthew Stafford isn't a dual threat quarterback? And it's just pretty crazy because that's the kind of stuff that I really like about Bevel's new offense, and I really liked. They were able to use that QB option today, and Stafford used his feet on multiple occasions. He only had 22 rushing yards, but it definitely helped the Lions out in some situations. He was able to use his feet and pick up the first down a couple of times, which was really good for their offense. Continue to drive, and that's the kind of thing you need to see him do. I really like that execution, even if it's just a little bit of running. The fact that he was able to outrush someone like Kyler Murray, who pretty much spent his entire college career running the football. Was impressive. So definitely pretty cool there to see, that kind of stat there, and definitely impressive for both Stafford and the Lions defense.
And who's your overall star that eclipses both offense and defense, the person that rose above everything and impressed you most today?
Yeah, so the most impressive player, I think, this is a pretty unanimous pick. I had to go with rookie tight end T.J. Hawkinson. He's been pretty much on Twitter. All the people who are hating on this pick pretty much were completely silent on social media today. I think overall this kid's going to be really, really good in their offense if they continue to use him properly. He had a big day, I believe, 130 something receiving yards and a touchdown. He broke the record for, I think, most receiving yards by a tight end in their first game in NFL history, which is incredible. He again, that's just another great Iowa talent. We saw it last year with George Kittle breaking the tight end receiving yard record, and maybe Hawkinson has a chance to do it this year. But I think he's going to be such a big target for the Lions going forward. He's definitely a big guy who's going to open up the field, will open up the other receivers. I think he's definitely going to get some bigger coverage coming next week when they play the Chargers, because you cannot leave that kid uncovered. You saw a lot of plays where he was getting 20, 30-yard gains because he was basically getting he basically wasn't covered and he was seeing really big gains. So that's the kind of thing you want to see from him. I think overall was just the most impressive player in the field. Like I said, I think just the biggest name you heard. I mean, just loved hearing his name called. I wasn't really expecting much from him going to the game, and I think that's why he was so impressive. I was expecting, a couple catches here and there, but I mean, he was just explosive during that game. I think silently was had one of the best fantasy performances this weekend. So really impressive stuff there. I'm hoping for a really big season from him.
Yeah, I think Hawkinson's a great pick. I'm going to give my list in just a second here, but I'll spoil it right now. Hawkinson isn't my overall best star because I wanted to keep my list a little bit separate from yours, considering this is the first week, and I think we should be as positive as possible, because one thing that you and I have kind of discussed off air is that fans have this air of negativity that they tend to look at the Lions with, right? And just at a time where the Lions aren't actually a bad team, I don't think that's necessary. So at least for the first week, we're going to try to be as positive as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we want to keep it good here. There obviously were some things the Lions didn't necessarily do very well in week one, but I think we're going to try to keep it as positive as we can. And, because there were a lot of positives that came out of this game. I think overall, it was a solid game, a lot to learn, but it's week one. It's just the first game of the season. There's a lot of room to grow, and I think, the Lions, I think it'll be an exciting season still. There was a lot that we saw today that, gave me hope for future games this season. So I think there's definitely a lot of positives we could talk about today.
Absolutely. So I'll go right into it. I'll start with my defensive star. I was really impressed with Tracy Walker. He had the interception early, right? And that, for me, that just seemed to shake Murray so much, on his first drive. To throw a pick like that, I think there was the quote afterwards that he said, "I'm not going to lie. At one point, I was just like, man, I'm going to pack it up and I'll call the A's and go play baseball." I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of joking in there because he rallied back and he proved that he was worthy of that first overall draft pick, in my opinion. But, Tracy Walker for me, other than Darius Slay, I think he was one of the best guys on defense today. So I wanted to throw a little praise to him because I kind of knew you were going to pick Kennard, and I think both of them shined today. When guys like, we were expecting guys like Trey Flowers, right? Like, if you asked us before the game, one of us would be picking Trey Flowers or Damon Harrison, right? But neither of us have.
Yeah, that's definitely I definitely think I would have, picked one of those guys who, I wouldn't. I'm really excited for Tracy Walker. I think he's going to have a really good career here, and I think he showed a lot of that today. But it just wasn't, he just wasn't necessarily at the top of my radar for someone who's going to have a big game. I think my eyes were on some of the new guys. I had my eyes more on like Tavai and Flowers, like you mentioned. So it's definitely good that Walker had a big game. Had another interception. He had one, I believe, last season. So it's nice to see him getting started early, and that's the kind of playmaking that the Lions need. The Lions are going to need a lot of force. Are going to need a lot of force a lot of turnovers on defense. So,
and he's taking the spot of Glover Quinn, right? Glover
Quinn
retired
exactly.
this past offseason, and not that Quinn wasn't getting old, and he has a right to retirement or whatever, all of that. It's good to see Walker kind of stepping into that role seamlessly, as we kind of thought he would, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I think what he sort of brings. I know, there's nothing against Quinn. He had a really good, career, but he was kind of, he was slowing down at the safety position. So
Exactly.
I think, Walker definitely brings that speed back to, to that position, and that'll be really important for the Lions down the road.
And on offense, my star is Marvin Jones. And Marvin Jones didn't have the best game. And I know a lot of you are going to say, well, why not pick Kenny Galladay? He was a beast out there as usual. He's the number one guy. And I wanted to throw a little praise to Marvin Jones because a few times during, regular time, not overtime, I saw him make some good plays and some hustle plays. But during overtime, he had two really tough, good catches, especially when you consider that there's an immense amount of pressure because of the blown lead, because the whole team probably felt like they shouldn't even be in that situation. And no matter which way you look at it, I think that the Lions don't get that tie if it isn't for Marvin Jones. And for a guy who has been considered the second receiver on his team for most of his career, I think that praise should go his way because, how often do you look at the second guy and go, wow, he really does do his job?
Yeah, I mean, that's really good. I mean, having a solid number 2 wide receiver is definitely really good. Especially, I think you mentioned to me, just the fact that, having a number 2 receiver and having a solid number 2 receiver sort of opens up, the number 1 wide receiver. I know there's a tendency to kind of, double cover, the number 1. I mean, you see Julio Jones gets it all the time, and I'm sure Kenny Galladay is going to be receiving a fair amount after his, breakout season last year. But so I think Marvin Jones having, some big games will sort of help, open up some of the coverage against Kenny Galladay, and he'll be able to, see some more passes come his way as well, because it's not that Kenny Galladay was necessarily limited today, but, it was tough because Kenny Galladay is probably going to get a lot of heavy coverage. He's going to see the number 1 cornerback on most teams.
Yeah, he's the clear first guy, and that's exactly, that is what I'm saying, that the second guy, when he does his job, it takes pressure off the first guy. And it kind of goes along with your pick for Hawkinson. If you have Hawkinson with 130 yards, a touchdown, you have Marvin Jones with so many yards, Galladay is going to get double covered or, pressure covered less often. And that's just such an important thing for the team to thrive, I think. We just don't have a Calvin Johnson anymore. As much as Kenny Galladay can be a beast, we don't have a Calvin Johnson. That was a luxury we had for such a long time. The Matthew Stafford could really chuck a ball up at any time, and at the very least it wasn't going to get intercepted because he'd get a hand on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of my logic behind Marvin Jones. But hey, if you want to argue with me and you think I should have picked someone else, go ahead to our Twitter at MSE Countdown and let me know who you think should have been my offensive star this week. And my overall star this week is Matthew Stafford. I'm a big Matthew Stafford fan. I mean, most of you, I'm sure, are aware that what he's going through with his wife. She's had surgery. She's had the brain tumor and all of that. It's a really, sad story, but he's such a resilient guy, and I think he takes a lot of crap. And he threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was the leader of this team, and in my opinion, he did absolutely nothing today that someone could discredit him and blame the loss somehow. Oh, Stafford's gonna Stafford. He blew it. He didn't blow it.
Yeah, I know. I feel like Stafford gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I saw it especially, people are just quick to blame Stafford on a loss, or I guess in this case a tie. But Matthew Stafford played fantastic today. 385 yards and 3 touchdowns. Fumbled a couple times, but his protection was absolutely awful today, especially on the left side, which is his blind side. So it's kind of hard to sort of give him fault for taking sacks or fumbling the football when he can't see the hit coming. So overall, yeah, I completely agree. Matthew Stafford had a great game today. There wasn't much to fault him for. He's still the leader of the team, and I think as good as Matthew Stafford is, I feel like they're still not putting enough trust into him, into being able to do his job, and we'll kind of get into that in a little bit, and we'll talk about some of our thoughts about some of the stuff that happened late in the game. So, but overall, yeah, I think Stafford was probably up there and one of the most important players in that game for sure.
And you kind of just touched on it, but We're going to go ahead and keep the negatives limited and kind of go with one negative star for the day, but I double up on this one. I'm pretty sure we're in agreement that Taylor Decker was the least impressive person in a Lions uniform on the field today.
Absolutely, yeah. To stray away from the negatives, I mean, there were a couple bad things that happened with the Lions today, but yeah, I think Taylor Decker was overall the most glaring issue with the team today. Like I said, he's responsible for blocking Stafford's blindside, and I'm not saying that he had an easy job by any means. I mean, Chandler Jones is on the edge for the Cardinals. He's no pushover. He's probably one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. But still, it's your responsibility to block for Matthew Stafford. And as early as the Lions drafted Taylor Decker, he's someone who who needs to step up and protect Stafford's blindside, because that's the most important position.
But let's take away the fact that he's getting beat, because honestly, like, I'm not gonna say I can live with a left tackle getting beat, because I really can't. But you saw later in the game that they recognized that he was struggling and needed help, and they throw a tight end. They throw an extra blocker over to help that side, to give Stafford more time. That's why the Lions got down the field in overtime, because they corrected the problem just a little too late in the game.
Yeah.
And my biggest issue was, at one point, I know he was responsible for at least 4 penalties. And
that was a big
things like false starts are just, for me, Taylor Decker was, impressing me in his time with the Lions. Like, I was mildly high on him, and today just kind of sunk everything. Like, it just made me think, like, oh God, we need a new left tackle.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was someone who defended him. I mean, he's been pretty good in that position. It wasn't really anything that I necessarily had a big concern about. I know that really the big conversation has been at left guard. I know that Joe Dahl and Kenny Wiggins have been sort of battling for that spot. So I think the guard play was one of the more things that I was concerned about. But left tackle wasn't even in my mind as something the Lions would have to be worried about. But apparently today Taylor Decker showed that we might have some worries at left tackle, and that's concerning going forward, because that's important. I mean, the Lions line, it needs to be successful in order for not only for Stafford to be successful, but for the run game. That's another thing I think we saw today.
Johnson had a rough go of it today, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And it's not that Kerryon Johnson, had a tough time running. I mean, he did at some points, but I mean, there were some points in the game where he was hardly in the game. They weren't giving him any touches, which I think is a little bit confusing, considering I thought Darrell Bevell's offense would be a little bit more run first. But I mean, he saw a lot of touches in those first couple of drives, and they completely pulled him out of the game. C.J. Anderson had a good bit of time there in the middle of the game, which I thought was kind of surprising, because I want to see Kerryon get as many touches as possible, but I guess they're still trying to keep him on that, limited basis, given the fact that he's coming off an injury from last season. So maybe they're just trying to limit his touches, and, maybe we'll see more of him going forward. But I think he looked pretty good in some of the, early touches that he saw during the game. But overall, the Lions did not have a really good time running the football today.
Yeah, it was just apparent today that the offensive line was the big negative of the day. And perhaps with a little better play, a field goal here, a field goal there, overtime doesn't happen, the comeback doesn't happen, such and such. You know what I mean? The longer Kyler Murray's on the bench, he doesn't have time to get back, out there and fix the mistakes he made. So, let's talk a little bit about, this new offensive coordinator. And, we have to talk about the timeout that he called. So let's do that. This was what, in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, this was in the fourth quarter. And the Lions were, in a good position. They were rolling, and they looked poised to, sort of make this play. I can't remember. I think it was was it a fourth down play that they were discussing? I can't necessarily remember exactly where, the play sort of happened. But, this timeout call.
I think it was at a third down. It was a critical time where the Lions needed to extend the drive. And more or less, they had a play design that they seemed very comfortable with, and they even ran it because the timeout was called at the last second. I think the only person on the field that knew the timeout was going to be called was the offensive coordinator, right?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the process that they had, that they had going there. And I just think it was interesting because, and that's sort of what I mentioned, is the fact that, the Lions just didn't put enough trust in Matthew Stafford, and I think that's where
Stafford
the
was
big
mad.
hiccup came. Yeah, and he was livid on the sideline.
That's right.
He basically
Because the play worked. I mean, they got it off, and it would have worked, right? Like, they got done what they needed to get done, and it was that lack of trust that kind of, pissed him off, for lack of a better word. And I really can't blame him because, he's the quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's, you heard him. Pretty much everywhere on Twitter. You saw, him sort of mouthing to Darrell Bevell. He basically just said, "Trust me," and I think that's the most important thing that I think the Lions need to do, because Bevell did. I'm not going to complain too much about Bevell's, coaching. I think the play calling was really, really good for the majority of the game.
There were a lot of things we saw today that like Jim Bob Cooter would never have called.
Exactly, and that's what I think is exciting. I'm really excited for Bevell's new offense, and I think he brings a good thing. Stafford pretty much thrived all day in that offense. Like I said, had a great day. But it's the tiny things, and it's the small things that Patricia and Bevell did, and it was the same thing we saw last season. He makes these little mistakes that end up having a huge ripple effect, and it ends up sort of costing the Lions the entire game, and it's frustrating. It really is. Especially with a guy who, knows how to lead a football team. He's an 11-year veteran. He's been in the league for a long time. The guy knows what he's doing. So it's frustrating to kind of see, that sort of happen. And, Bevell had played really good all, the coaching was, I think, all around was just really good, but they took their foot off the gas pedal. The Lions should have continued to press on offense and continue to, score touchdowns and, put more points on the board. But, they did what the Lions usually do when they put points on the board, is they take their, foot off the gas pedal. When they have a lead, it seems like the Lions don't ever do anything with the lead, and they allow the other team to come back. It's the same thing. The coach, the coaching ends up putting the defense in sort of prevent mode, and then, the offense gets a chance to get into rhythm, and we saw that again today against the Cardinals. And you can't let a guy like Kyler Murray get comfortable, because he was, the play calling in the beginning of the first half was great. He looked uncomfortable, and he was making mistakes. He was throwing interceptions. He wasn't able to find, his receivers, and it was good. The Lions defense was creative. And it was effective. The Cardinals offense had no answer to the Lions defense in the first half, and that fell apart in the fourth quarter.
Let's go into that. Can you explain what, we all recognize it. There is that prevent mode that they go into. And for me, it's still a 2-score game if it's a 16-point difference. That for me is too early to go into prevent mode, right? If you're up 3 scores, I understand it, But can you explain, or at least, theorize, hypothesize why it is that this is the Lion way, to just let your foot off the gas pedal? Because, a while ago, maybe we would not have called it intentional, but it certainly is.
Yeah, it feels that way. For whatever reason, the Lions defense, they get, conservative. I'm sure it might be a way to sort of save energy, and but it costs the team points. It really does. The defense sort of, if you looked at it, whatever strategy they had for going into that conservative style defense, it didn't work, because in the fourth quarter, the defense was still gassed. They were on the field multiple times. The offense wasn't getting it done, because of and it was the play calling. They got conservative, and, the defense had to be completely, had to get back on the field, and they just weren't ready to be back out. They weren't getting proper rest, and I don't really know what the issue is. I don't know why they go into prevent mode, but it's the same thing that we saw last year with Paul Pasqualoni. Is it's the fact that the defense just gets too conservative near the end of the game, especially when they have a lead, and they can't do anything about it. It's so frustrating. I don't know why they choose to do it. I'm not really sure necessarily what strategy they try to employ here when they're doing this kind of prevent style defense, but it just doesn't work. They need to stay creative the entire game, and that showed again today. Keeping the creative defense, will disrupt the quarterback, and they get uncomfortable, and that's exactly what they need to do. But they stopped doing whatever they were doing on defense, and Kyler got comfortable, and he started throwing the ball more, and he started building his connections, and that's just the thing that you cannot do when it comes to playing defense and strategizing against, especially a young offensive powerhouse like Kyler Murray. I mean, you saw how he played in college. He was bound to warm up sometime. You're going to let him play. So you can't just let a guy like that get comfortable. It's just not going to bode well for your defense.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, talking about, trying to preserve the defense, because probably the way of thinking, amongst the coaches, amongst the staff, is that, hey, if we have a 2-score lead, it's better to preserve the defense and win by a touchdown than to gas out the defense and, win by 2 scores or 3 scores, which, in theory is not the worst practice. But when you have a result like we had today, where they didn't lose it, but they fell apart and it ended up in a tie, and that's not a win. I think that's the wrong way to go. And you also mentioned conditioning, which is a big red flag for me. The defense was tired. They were gassed by the fourth quarter. It showed. Kyler Murray was able to do more things, not only because of his level of comfortability in an NFL setting, but because he had a more sluggish defense coming at him and, defending his receivers. So my question to you is, do you think that this is just like a scenario, right? Like, they're in Arizona, which I think that the building is inside, right?
Yeah, it's a closed building.
So, like, there's no heat deal, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a concern, because these should be maybe not exact same conditions as Ford Field, but very similar.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't, I don't really think the conditions necessarily had anything to do with it. I understand where you're coming from, if it was hot outside, let's say they were playing like Miami and it was super hot out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, I live in South Florida, so I mean, as a fan, going to a game at Ford Field is much more enjoyable, because half the game that you go to in Miami is in the sun. You're baked, you have a sunburn all over the front side of your body, and it's I can only imagine what the players have to go through. But this was indoors, so conditions didn't affect them. Are you worried about the Lions' level of fitness? Like, are they gonna get tired every fourth quarter, or can they fix that, or was it just it's the first game, so they may have not balanced themselves properly?
Yeah, I think I think it's just a first game hiccup here. I have some confidence in the fact that the defense did look really good. I don't really think it was necessarily one of those things where it's something that we'll see sort of repetitively. I think it was just one of those things where they were seeing a lot of reps on the field. The offense was just, like I said, the offense play calling just got conservative towards the end of the game, and they weren't, the defense was having to go back on the field multiple times, and we're having to, defend. And that's the frustrating part, is the fact that, the defense, it's not that, the defense was bad, but it wasn't necessarily all their fault. Like I said, they were just tired from the amount that they were playing. In some aspects, you have to look at it and say the offense needs to get the job done. And I'm not saying that's on Stafford or anything. I'm saying that's on the play calling. You need to stay consistent with that all game, because if your defense is on the field too much, they're going to get tired. It's as simple as that. You can condition as much as you want, but if the offense can't get the job done, their defense is on the field, they're going to get tired regardless.
Absolutely.
It's a physically exerting game. I mean, you have to be going. They're expecting you to go to 100%. Pretty much all game, and it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. So for them to be gassed in the fourth quarter, and especially in overtime, it's completely understandable. Because the defense played well most of the game. Yeah. I really can't complain on most aspects of the defense. It's just one of those things where the play calling got conservative, and it was just unfortunate because the defensive players weren't able to handle it late in the game.
Absolutely. We spent a good deal on the Lions today, and we're going to move on in a second, but I think that we should take a minute and step back from our, position as Lions fans and look at the job that Kyler Murray did today. I mean, he had a rough start, and he was absolutely incredible. He probably gained more doubters than he ever had in the first half of that game, and then somehow in the same exact amount of time, he silenced all of them.
Yeah.
How impressed were you today with Kyler Murray?
I was pretty impressed. At the beginning of the game, I was a little bit disappointed. He just looked uncomfortable out there, and his decision making had some flaws, and I think that's what we saw in the preseason as well. A lot of people, just said that their offense just looked scrambled. The Arizona's offense just looked discombobulated. And that's what happens when you have a new offense and you have a new quarterback. It's tough to kind of adjust. And I think he did sort of get comfortable. It's one of those things where, you have to just look at it and say, wow, this was impressive. I mean, I was impressed with the Cardinals on all aspects of the field. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald, first of all, looks fantastic still. And, he still looks like he played another 5 years in the NFL, which is incredible.
My favorite thing about Larry Fitzgerald tonight was that I have no doubt that he was I saw him on the sidelines talking to Kyler Murray, working through things, and I'm sure he was saying things like, keep your head up. You can still get out of this. This is still a game. You can prove everyone wrong. Don't let those thoughts creep into your head. And I think having a veteran like that who you can connect with on some amazing throws that Kyler Murray made late in the game to Larry Fitzgerald, that bond for me, like just to kind of watch that develop and show on television, was very, very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that you definitely need. I mean, for a veteran, wide receiver to be able to connect with your young quarterback is definitely something that's good. I know a lot of the guys might not necessarily be too inclined to sort of, necessarily work with the young guy, I guess, but Larry Fitzgerald's always been one of those guys sort of, under the radar wide receivers. For sure, for me, is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Just
absolutely,
incredible wide receiver.
And he's a classy individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw post game. I mean, him and Darius Slay and Marvin Jones, I think we're just, having a conversation. I'm not sure if they swapped jerseys at all, but I know.
No doubt there's mutual respect amongst all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of mutual respect there. I mean, one of the classiest wide receivers in the NFL, doesn't really have a big mouth. He's not, he doesn't have a big mouth like somebody else in the NFL. He doesn't.
We'll get to him. We'll have a whole segment on him.
Right. But for sure, yeah. One of the best wide receivers to ever play the game.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to point out also about the Cardinals is the fact that I know they had a depleted secondary. I know Patrick Peterson is serving a 4-game suspension, and I think their number 2 cornerback has I can't remember. He has some injury. He's out. I think he broke his ankle or something like that, like fractured his ankle. But Byron Jones, which is the rookie they just drafted in the most recent draft. And the other secondary played really well in that game. I know one of the quarterbacks, I'm not sure necessarily who it was, broke up a late Kenny Golladay would have been touchdown.
Yes.
He had great coverage on Kenny Golladay. Probably would have ended the game.
Absolutely.
And had great coverage on that. And that's the kind of thing that I think I was most impressed by with the Cardinals. I think it's just the fact that they held their own on defense.
Yes, their fight. I was most impressed with their fight and their grit and their determination to not let a game that most people were counting them out of, to not count themselves out,
Exactly,
and that's really important, especially for a young team with a young quarterback, to have that kind of rally ability, to have that kind of trust that, hey, everything can be okay. We just have to make it okay, and then to go do that, not get down on themselves. Because, I mean, as Lions fans, how many times have we seen a team just get upset and collapse?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen it countless times, and that's the kind of thing. I mean, that defense kept their head in the game the entire time. Gave up a lot of points. I mean, they gave up. Definitely did not have the most stellar performance on defense, but they held their own there, and they tied the game. They came back and scrapped and clawed their way back to a tie. So that was definitely impressive for the Cardinals defense there, and just the Cardinals all around.
Absolutely. An impressive outing from the Cardinals, but unfortunately, as Lions fans, we are forced to suffer a 27-27 tie in the first game of the season in what looked like it should have been an easy win for the Lions. So no doubt there will be plenty of fans that are mad and probably mad at us because we didn't rip the Lions, but I guarantee if this continues and it goes later into the seasons, we will be more vicious than anyone. Let's look forward to next week. The Lions are playing the Chargers. It's in Detroit, right?
Yes, that game is in Detroit.
So, is it a 1:00 game? It's a 1:00 game, right?
Yeah, I believe it's at 1:00
because we're on the East Coast. So, what are your thoughts of that game? I don't know if you got a chance to watch the Chargers and the Colts play today, but that was another game that I think a lot of people thought would be kind of an easy blowout. I know Melvin Gordon's holding out. But, Austin Eckler is a really good running back, and the Chargers struggled. They didn't have their best game, and they went to overtime, and they got the ball first in overtime and delivered a touchdown, which is kind of what I was hoping the Lions would do. but it almost seems like it's fitting for the Lions and Chargers to play next week because they're very comparable teams when you look at this week's performance.
Absolutely. And I think the Chargers are a really good offense. Like I said, I mean, even without Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, and Josh Jackson, are both really good running backs.
Josh Jackson was incredibly impressive today.
Yeah. So was Austin Eckler. I mean, he had 3 rushing touchdowns today, which was incredible. I think he had 3 rushing touchdowns. He had 3 total touchdowns. I'm not sure if they were rushing or receiving, but
it's like
had a really
James
good day
Conner
as well.
2.0. You know, you had
Exactly,
Le'Veon Bell hold out. Now you're having Melvin Gordon hold out, and it's just showing that, hey, if you want to give up your spot, someone will take it.
Yeah, exactly. And Keenan Allen had another big day. Phillip Rivers is, again, one of the better NFL quarterbacks. He's had a really good career.
But he was under immense pressure, much like Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I think it's their offensive line that kind of struggles in that game, and their defense struggled as well. I mean, Marlon Mack and the Colts pretty much ran all over the Chargers today. I think the biggest surprise was the fact that, he didn't have a great game, but I think, the biggest offseason surprise we saw was the fact that the retirement of Andrew Luck, which basically meant, Jacoby Brissett was basically thrown into the starting lineup, and he didn't necessarily have a great game by any means, but, he
has starter experience, and he
he
performed fairly well. I mean, the team exceeded expectations, and I don't think you can do that if your quarterback isn't playing above expectations.
Yeah, he's definitely put into a tough situation there, and I definitely don't think that anyone was necessarily expecting him to put up Andrew Luck numbers, but he did. Like I said, he was serviceable in his time. I think the Colts just overall had a pretty good success in that game. Unfortunately, I think I heard that Colts wide receiver Devin Funchess broke his collarbone, so that's going to be a big blow to their offense. That's already reeling from Andrew Luck retirement, but they still have a lot of good targets on that team. T.Y. Hilton, big touchdown reception leader last year. Eric Ebron, as much as Lions fans aren't fans of him, but like I said, he's a big red zone target. He had a pretty quiet day today, but.
Well, he had a touchdown that I thought should have stayed a touchdown, and they took it away because he bobbled it. Which, now that I've said that, I'm sure Lions fans are going to have a field day because Hawkinson certainly didn't bobble much tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I'm actually a big Eric Ebron fan. I've had him in multiple fantasy teams since he's left Detroit, and I think that he's just a good player who got a bad rep while he was developing, which often is the case when you're in a city like Detroit that wants the next big thing for their city. They desperately want someone to elevate them. So quickly, do you think the Lions beat the Chargers next week?
I think they definitely have a really good chance. I think the Lions will be sort of itching to get a win next week after pretty much blowing that performance against the Cardinals. I think they'll have a chip on their shoulder, and I think the defense will be looking to have an even stronger game. So I think if the Lions can basically do the same thing on offense except get conservative towards the end of the game, if they can use Hawkinson properly and open up the wide receivers, I think they'll have a great game. They just need to open up the run game 100%. They need to be able to football. They can run the football.
And that's exactly where I was going with that, is that the one thing they need to do differently and that they have the best chance to do playing a team like the Los Angeles Chargers is getting Kerryon Johnson to that 100-yard mark, way earlier than in the season than he did last year, right? He's the premier back. He's got to get more touches. He's got to get, more yards on more touches. And once he is part of that offensive game, Matthew Stafford is going to have a much easier time. And the offensive line, I think, will have an easier time too. And it feels like, you mentioned Marlon Mack kind of ran all over them today. So the Chargers might be the team for Kerryon Johnson to have a rebound game. So if you're a fantasy owner of him, I would definitely start him next week, as I will be. Our second story tonight, we have to talk about Michigan, right? I wish we had done an episode last week because Michigan got through, who'd they play? Middle Tennessee State, something like that?
Yeah, Middle Tennessee State.
Okay, yeah, I watched that game until I knew they had it, which was pretty early. And it was the first game of the season, which, often feels like the good teams, or the quote-unquote good teams, schedule somewhat cupcake opponents to kind of start the season, which I don't exactly blame them for. But I've considered, since the schedule came out or since we've had, a good idea of the schedule or been focusing on it, that Army was somewhat of a trap game, and it certainly proved to be. I was actually at a different college football game this week. I was at the UCF FAU game, so I didn't get a lot of chance to watch it except at like various televisions in the Boca Raton parking lots and while we were tailgating. But Chase, I know you watched the game. Talk to me about, what it's like to be a Michigan fan who has to sit through that entire game.
Overall, I mean, that was a very, very poor game. I think, we were biting our fingernails pretty much the entire game. We were very concerned about that game as Michigan fans. And there's a lot to be frustrated about. Again, I think it's the play calling. It's, there's no reason as to why that game should have gone into overtime, double overtime, I should say, against Army. Michigan did end up pulling out a win, but seriously, it's just not the performance you want to see. Just struggles on offense. Shea Patterson, again, just has had issues with holding onto the ball. And that's something they struggle with again today. On Saturday, excuse me. It's just frustrating to see. I mean, pretty much one of the only bright spots in that entire game was Zach Charbonnet had another really good game. Had 3 rushing touchdowns in that game, including one in overtime. But other than that, I mean, the Michigan's offense looked really bad. Had a slow start. They were down 14-7 at halftime, and ended up pulling out a win 24-21 in double OT. You would have thought they won the Super Bowl after that game. They pretty much jumped into the crowd. I mean, that's a big win. I mean, I think that's a good, sort of scrappy comeback win there for Michigan. But it's just something they shouldn't have had to do against, Army. As good as, like you mentioned, it was a trap game. I mean, Army is a good football program, but it's just the kind of thing you just can't see as a Michigan program who was headed into that game 7th ranked in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the offensive struggles and Shea Patterson not being able to hold on to the ball. 3 fumbles in the first half, and then they entered halftime down 14-7. I mean, as a Michigan fan, I saw that on the television right before I was heading out, and I was in shock. I was like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I was afraid was going to happen. Let's talk about the quarterback situation, right? Like, I take it you're not the biggest fan of Shea Patterson. Are you a McCaffrey fan?
No, it's not that I'm not a fan of Shea Patterson. I really do like Shea Patterson, but it's just frustrating to see him struggle. I mean, this is an offense that we were promised was supposed to be so good, was supposed to be airing out the ball a ton, and Zach Charbonnet touched the ball 33 times in that game. Not that I don't want to see a guy like Zach Charbonnet, thrive in that offense. I mean, 33 touches for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns is a great performance, but it's just not the kind of offense we were promised. We were promised this whole speed and space offense, that featured great receivers like, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who was injured in that game, so I'm not going to give any flack for that. But Nico Collins, Tariq Black, Ronnie Bell, all really, electric wide receivers that Michigan has on offense and just not used properly at all. I mean, you saw multiple times during this game that Shea Patterson was overthrowing wide receivers. Saw it a couple times he overthrew Ronnie Bell. I mean, I think on multiple occasions. I mean, just saw it plenty of times, and it's just disappointing. I mean, this is a former 5-star recruit out of high school. And as much as I do like Shea Patterson, I don't want to, sort of knock on him too much. It's just, it's not that I don't necessarily have trust in Dylan McCaffrey yet. I think Dylan McCaffrey could be really, really good. It's just not something I haven't seen enough that he hasn't had enough, there's not enough sample size there in order to see anything, if that makes sense. All I've seen him do is run the football. I haven't necessarily seen him air it out, and that scares me because, I want to see quarterbacks who can throw the football effectively. And I think that's, the kind of offense that I want to see as a Michigan fan. It's just the fact that, we want to see the wide receivers used properly.
Yeah.
So, seeing a poor performance there is just disappointing. It's not that I'm, upset with, Shea Patterson. I am a big fan of Shea Patterson. It's just the fact that, the offense is struggling. I really hope the offense can pick it up, can figure out whatever is wrong in these next couple of weeks. And I think Patterson realizes that too. I mean, he's just pretty much said, even after Middle Tennessee State, where they won a little bit more, decidedly over Middle Tennessee versus Army. I mean, he said he just needs to be better. And I think he said it again after the Army game as well. They just need to prepare a little bit more, and I think it's a new offense, so maybe he's just a little bit, maybe he just is struggling a little bit. But we've seen his ability to throw the football, and I don't know why he's necessarily struggling so early this season, especially against weaker teams. I don't really want to call them weaker, but I mean they kind of are. You know what I mean? You saw him play well against teams like Wisconsin, last season, and it's just kind of disappointing to see him struggle so early this year. And I'm not necessarily sure how that bodes for Michigan's season going forward.
Yeah, something needs to be fixed, and you're right. Thankfully, the Wolverines are on a bye next week, correct?
Yeah, the Wolverines are on bye, and then they go to play at Wisconsin, I believe, in Madison, which is a really big game. That's definitely a huge game for them. They need to pull out a win there. If they can pull out a win, I think they can sort of redeem themselves from their poor performance against Army. But that's definitely a tough game for them. They might not be able to pick up a victory there, considering it's in Madison. So it's going to be tough. They're going to have to correct all their mistakes on offense and defense going into that game. So if they want to get a win, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping that the bye week sort of helps them, straighten out some of their issues. But they've got a lot of work out. So.
Yeah, thankfully they do have, like a full 2 weeks kind of to prepare for that game. Wisco's not a team that should be taken lightly, and I think Michigan's not really in a position, especially after this Army game, which was which was absolutely a trap game. They're not in a position to take any team lightly, let alone another Big Ten team. So I think that they will start to correct those adjustments, but I'm curious. What if you're Jim Harbaugh, right? What is the number one thing that they need to address and fix over the next 2 weeks? Is it fixing that balance between the passing attack and the running?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just adjusting the offense. I think it's just getting Shea Patterson comfortable in the offense. I think it's definitely correcting some things on defense as well. The pass rush has been something that's kind of iffy, and we saw it ended up sealing the game. You saw Kwity Paye. And Josh Uche sort of there at the end, getting a big sack to end the game and forcing the fumble. But I think overall, they just need to just sort of balance. I mean, Army was able to run the ball really well in that game, so I think they just need to improve. They need to improve on all sides of the ball. I think overall, I just think Harbaugh needs to improve himself more than anything. I know a lot of people are putting this, this close game on Harbaugh and some of the play calling, and it's frustrating. I mean, you want to see Michigan play really well and live up to their potential. They have the talent to do it, 100%. They have the talent to win football games, but Jim Harbaugh 100% needs to get this team in a position to win football games, because you can't have another close game like that, especially against a team like Army. Because I'm not saying that Army's not good, but you're going to play. Your schedule's a lot harder than that. You're playing in East Lansing this year. You're playing Ohio State, even though it's at home. You're playing them, they're still a really, really good football team. Location never matters
with that game. Everything is out the window. One team could be ranked number one in the polls, and one team could be unranked, and I would still guarantee you that it will be a one-score game, because that's just kind of how that rivalry tends to go. But, you're right. Like, they obviously have Wisconsin to, look forward to and to prepare for over the next 2 weeks, but they have an entire season to prepare for with a heavy schedule, right? Like, it is not an easy schedule, and I think there's proof, in the history of the college football playoff that it's not the easiest thing for a team that should get in to get in if they haven't really been dominant all season or for multiple seasons, right?
No, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. So, and I think that's one of the things that Michigan's going to have to control. I mean, they've struggled early against big teams, not big teams, but teams that are sort of not really as good. And you're going to play a lot tougher competition. I mean, like we said, they've got Wisconsin, they've got Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State. I mean, and Notre Dame. They've got a really tough schedule this season. And sometimes the college football playoffs doesn't necessarily always take adversity into that. I mean, they will look at strength of schedule for sure, but Michigan fell. I mean, through and through, Michigan fell 3 spots in the AP poll this week, and in the coaches poll due to their performance against Army.
Exactly.
And that speaks volumes. I mean, it's the kind of thing that a lot of people don't really trust Michigan right now. A lot of Michigan entering the season at 7 in the AP poll. I think a lot of people are thinking right now, hey, they're not living up to the hype. They really need to step up their game if they're gonna sort of, have any credibility anymore. I mean, Jim Harbaugh needs to bring some credibility back into this program, and they're not going to, or else, there was so much talk in the preseason about how they'd potentially be, a team that could make, the college football playoffs. And right now they're not looking like anywhere close to making a college football playoff. So I think it's definitely going to be, if Michigan can't figure it out, it's definitely going to be a rough year for them.
Speaking of Harbaugh, like, how do you feel about him? I mean, I like him as a coach. I'm not, afraid of his personality or anything like that. I think that a strong personality is a good thing to have in a coach. But this is year 5.
Yeah, this is year 5.
So I'm not exactly sure what his contract is, but I know a lot of them do 5-year contracts and things like that. How close are we getting to the end of the Harbaugh era if this season doesn't work out the way Michigan fans are desperately hoping it does?
It's tough for me. I'm in a tough situation because, Harbaugh has done a lot for the program. I mean, I think, in the last, I think it's in the last, 2 decades, Michigan has, 5 10-win seasons, and Harbaugh owns, 3 of those 5 10-win seasons.
I'm not saying that he's not better than the Michigan coaches of the past. Michigan coaches over the last decade, 2 decades to be honest, have been hit or miss. They have their ups and downs, and Harbaugh is certainly one of the better ones that, as a Michigan fan, that I've seen in quite some time. But I mean, you full well know that that's just not enough for today's fan climate, right? Like, this is the generation of immediate gratification, right? Like, they need to know that the pick that they made and the person that they're paying millions of dollars, or the person that the university is paying millions of dollars, is panning out for the fan base. And at a certain point, the fan base's calls will become loud enough. Do you think that's this season, or do you think he still has more leeway?
It's tough for me, honestly. It's really tough because I think, I've seen more and more the fact that fans are very upset with the way Harbaugh has been coaching. Because like I mentioned before, this team has the talent to be really good. I mean, they have a 5-star quarterback. Last year they had the number 1 defense in the country. And there's a lot of question marks still. I mean, there should not be that many question marks in the offense and on the defense. This team, did lose a lot last year, but I mean, they like I said, they still have a lot of really, really good talent on this football team, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to win football games. There's no reason why any of the first 2 games should have been close. And it comes down to offensive execution, and I think that's disappointing because I know that Harbaugh still controls much of the offense, and there's so much hype built into the offseason, especially. One of the things that, Harbaugh, repetitively hyped up in the offseason was the offensive line. And the offensive line was not good against Army. I mean,
garbage.
Shea Patterson was getting blown up pretty much that entire game. I mean, it was ridiculous. He was seeing so much pressure, and, he wasn't able to handle it. And, that's one of the things that I think is frustrating. There's so much hype, and then they don't live up to it. And I think that's one of the things that, and that I agree. I mean, if Michigan is getting the hype of being a college football playoff team, then, they should be able to live up to those expectations.
Yeah, they have to walk the walk if they're going to talk the talk.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, the media does do a bit of enabling when it comes to getting Michigan's fans' hopes up because,
for sure,
I think, you said this earlier, and I agree that 7 was probably too high of a ranking. They've fallen to 10 now, which honestly seems more realistic. I'm not saying they can't work their way up, but just, just seeing the team, that's just, they're not as good as they were advertised.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they're not performing as well as they should be, at least.
Yeah, and I think that's the most frustrating part. I mean, Harbaugh, I think, here's the thing. My position on it. I think Harbaugh should be on the hot seat, and I think he is, but I just don't think Michigan's in a position necessarily to remove him. I don't think they will, because I don't know. That's just sort of where I'm standing. It doesn't look like their athletic director has any desire to, get rid of him. I mean, that's sort of the thing. I mean, when the athletic director brought on Juwan Howard as the basketball coach. He promised Howard that he could be the Jim Harbaugh of Michigan basketball. and to use that comparison in an interview for the head coaching job for basketball, I mean, that is, that just goes to show you how Jim Harbaugh what effect he has on that program, and what, where his standing is. So I don't really think he's going anywhere anytime soon. As much as I think he should be on the hot seat, and I think he should be held accountable for some of this coaching and some of these expectations not falling through. It's just the fact that I don't think he will be held accountable. And I think that's sort of the frustrating part for me, is just the fact that I think, I don't know if Harbaugh is going to continue to be mediocre and just have 9-10 win seasons. That's not a positive, direction for the program to be going in. Because as good as it is to have 10 win seasons, if you have 10 win seasons every year, there's no growth there. That's just continuing to stay the same every year, and you just can't have that. You just don't want that mediocrity in your football program.
I totally agree. This discussion about Harbaugh, just the entire time we've been talking, there's a lyric from a Kanye West song that I keep thinking of, and it's, is it better to be overpaid or underrated? And, it's a valid question if you consider them circumstances, but when you look at Harbaugh, the question from Michigan fans is becoming, is he overpaid and overrated, which is never the combination that you want. So he's not really like, you can't really make the argument of like, oh, well, you really don't give him enough credit, because it's like, everyone gives him the world of credit. And at a certain point, he does need to show up. He needs to.
No, I completely agree.
It's gonna fall on him. I heard a year ago. Okay, this is 4 years. Harbaugh has 4 years of recruitment classes, and it's the Harbaugh way. Everyone's in line now, and that doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't get Michigan to where they want to be. So they need to take that next step to really become an elite program again. And I know Michigan fans desperately want that. So we'll see how that goes. We've talked about football for about an hour now, so we're going to stop the football talk, and we're going to kind of hard transition into our third story tonight. This was somewhat expected. Chase, I know you know a whole lot more about this than I do, but Niklas Kronwall retired. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I think it's pretty unsurprising the fact that Niklas Kronwall, was able to retire. And the reason I say it was able to, because I think, he retired on his own stand. He did it in, he did it with his future and his family in mind. And I think that's the most important thing. He left.
Chase, I got to interrupt you real quick. I just got a breaking news update from Twitter that says the Red Sox have fired team president Dave Dombrowski. So if you'll remember, Dave Dombrowski was the former team president of the Detroit Tigers during their great spending years and lots of winning. But I just think that is an absolutely hilarious notification for me to get during this podcast. Now, we'll go back to hockey, but I just had to mention that for the Tigers fans out there.
All right. Wow. Some big breaking news there, but yeah, definitely. So sort of straying back sort of to Kronwall here, but he, like I said, he left it all on the ice. The Red Wings posted like a 4.5 minute tribute video sort of to him and his his career in Detroit, and he gave like a video sort of response of his retirement and announcing his retirement. I think it was really cool. He brought a lot to the Red Wings organization. I think he's been a vital part of the defense. I mean, he's been one of the better defensive players that the Red Wings had. So I think he's just one of those iconic players. I mean, when you think of NHL defensemen and, big hits, I mean, he's one of the first players that comes to mind. I mean, one of the coolest things that I remember is just in one of the Red Wings games, I remember just the chant, "You got Kronwall," just echoing through Joe Louis Arena. And it was just one of my favorite moments. It's so cool just that he sort of gets that memory, that sort of impact, getting Kronwall is just one of the coolest things in hockey, I think. Not for the person getting hit, but, but
definitely not for the person getting Kronwall, but
yeah,
you're right. No, his name is iconic. And as much as I'm not the biggest hockey fan, and I'm more of a baseball fan, I know his name, and I know how important he was to that defense. He's one of the premier defensemen I think that the Red Wings have had in our lifetime, right? We're both relatively young, and I think that most of the time when we think of like, a good Red Wings team, we think of him, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not that I necessarily didn't get to see him for most of his career, but I mean, it was awesome that he got to, hoist the Stanley Cup with the team in 2008. And I think, that's one of the most important things in his speech that he mentioned. It was just the fact that, this team will hoist another Stanley Cup soon, but he just won't be on the team to do it.
And that's an honorable way to go out. I mean,
yeah.
he seems like a classy individual. I think the response from the Red Wings organization, I know Yzerman was really not pressuring him to make a decision one way or another. They're preparing for life with him or without him. Probably more so without him because this was somewhat expected. But I want to ask you, we've called him iconic. We've kind of spoke to the lore that is Kronwall. Where does he land? First in kind of Detroit history, and where does he land in NHL history? Is he a Hall of Famer?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, he'll go down as probably one of the better NHL defensemen. I still think. I mean, he's pretty close to the top in Red Wings history. There are probably a good amount of regular defensemen.
It's tough because the Red Wings have an extensive history. They've been a very good team for most of their existence.
Yeah, and it's not so. I mean, he doesn't necessarily hold the flame to Nick Lindstrom, who was probably one of the best defensemen in NHL history. But he still had a great career in Detroit. I think he had over 400 goals, which is like, it's insane. I mean, he's one of the only players. He's one of the only defensemen in NHL history to do that. I mean, he's among very few NHL defensemen to score, to be plus 400 points in their career. So, I mean, he's definitely had a great career. I think he'll be a Hall of Famer for sure. He's definitely one of the better Red Wings that have ever, skated. But that's just my personal opinion. So, I definitely think that he will be someone who potentially makes a Hall of Fame. So, just a big piece.
He could easily make the Hall of Fame, and
yeah,
there's really not much to be said here. I feel like other than, he was just a great Red Wing, and how lucky were we to see him as fans.
Exactly, yeah. And I think one important thing that a lot of people may have missed, but at the end of the video, he said that he's actually joining the Red Wings as a advisor to the general manager. So he'll actually be continuing to work with the team and Steve Yzerman. So it's great that the team decided to give him a role and sort of bring him back in some capacity, because I'm sure he doesn't, it's tough for him to necessarily leave the game, but it gives him, the ability to sort of be closer to his family, but, be off the ice and kind of take away the physical aspect of the game,
exactly,
but still be able to have some Red Wings, hockey still left in them.
Yeah, as people get older, their bodies break down and they're just not able to do what they once did. And especially if he didn't see himself or didn't see the Red Wings, rebuilding in time for him to be a vital part of that team, which is likely the case here. I'm impressed with the situation all around. The thing that I want to ask you, they've got his mind, working with the general manager and working with the team. So how do they use that to some of the younger players that are now going to fill his role? Who fills his role, and how do they kind of, establish not a new Kronwall, but, keep that same toughness going?
Yeah, so I think the Red Wings defense will look pretty similar. I think now that Kronwall has retired, I think you'll see a little bit more of Dennis Cholowski this season. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. They have three young defensemen, I should say. They have Madison Bowie, Philip Hronik, and Dennis Cholowski now on defense. And I think he'll prove as a good mentor. I don't necessarily know how much he'll work necessarily with the development, but I'm sure he'll work with the defense already. I know he probably has already worked greatly with a lot of the players on the roster.
Exactly. It's like a player coach becoming a regular coach.
Exactly, yeah. So, it's one of those things where, he definitely will, I think, impact some of those guys. You're going to see a lot of young defense here in the next couple of years. You saw Moritz Seider just drafted this most recent year. Mm-hmm. A lot of defensemen drafted this most recent year, and they've got a lot of good guys in the system like Jared McIsaac and a couple other really good, prospects and stuff like that. But I think what's important is just the fact that, with Kronwall sort of leaving, like you mentioned, I mean, I think he's going to serve as such a big role, in that sort of aspect, just the fact that, sort of grooming some of these guys into that sort of position. The Red Wings, like I mentioned, will be losing a lot of guys next season as well. I believe Jonathan Ericsson's contract is up next season. They lose Trevor Daly next season as well. So they're losing a lot of pieces on defense. There's going to be a lot of openings on the team, and I think, I think guys like Moritz Seider, like I mentioned, are already really far in their development. I think you'll see guys like that up on the main roster potentially next season. So I think him sort of, helping and being in that sort of advice to the GM role will sort of help, not only with player development, but also with scouting. It'd also be really important just to see what aspects of the game that, guys, and what to look for. Maybe Kronwall can help draft future Kronwalls himself, by looking at, and being that in that advisor role. So I think that's definitely important for just the development of defensemen, because defense has been something that the Red Wings have struggled in recent years. The defense has been a little bit of a question mark, but I think now, they're a young team on defense, and they're sort of looking forward to further developing some young talent into that position for the Red Wings.
Exactly. That's exactly how I feel. I think although Kronwall's retirement is sad in many ways, in many other ways, it's encouraging, because I think that it does, even if it's minorly, I think it accelerates that rebuilding process. And, Red Wings fans want excellence. They want playoff contention. And I think that this is like a good way to help move that process along and transition from one era to another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where, it's tough to see a guy go, but for them to keep the guy in the organization like Kronwall, it's really good. It bodes well for their future. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing, what his impact is going forward for the team.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our fourth story, is there anything else you wanted to mention about Kronwall?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to see a guy like that go. It's a big hole that you got to fill on defense. But, I'm still excited for this upcoming Red Wings season. There's only a couple more months. I believe they start in the middle of October this season, so it's about a month and a half left. So
I was going to say, I'm glad we finally got a Red Wings story in here. We've been waiting for something kind of big to happen, and this was certainly newsworthy. So I know you're excited for the season to get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our fourth story today, we'll talk about the Tigers. It'll be somewhat brief because, like most of the season, there just isn't a lot of good to talk about the Tigers. They lost today to the Oakland Athletics, as they often do. But the Tigers are at 100 losses, and that's number's certainly going to go up. They are vying for that number one overall draft pick and worst team in the league, which is their own version of tanking, I guess. But they've drafted some good players, Riley Green and Casey Mize, being the most notable in the past 2 years. But I think the hope is that they're gonna get the third piece, and then the rebuild will finally get going. And part of that we're gonna start to see in September with September call-ups. Now, throughout the season, we've been talking about guys like, Casey Mize, right? Casey Mize isn't going to get called up in September as much as we'd all like to see him, nor will Riley Green. They're simply too young, and it's not a wise idea to, push them into those positions earlier than they need to. Let them be comfortable where they are. They're young. They're healthy for now, or, Mize still has a good amount of health, even though they kind of shut him down this season. But the guys you're going to see are the Kyle Funkhausers, Bo Burrows. And Burrows' name is somewhat exciting because I think of him as, maybe the third guy in a good rotation 4 years down the road for Detroit. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so on the hitting side, Travis Demerit, he's been kind of up and down. He'll be up in September. You'll see a lot of him. Kristen Stewart will be back, but it's really just kind of the names that we've seen so far. The guys that, I would really talk about in this situation have already kind of come up and started to impress. We're talking about Harold Castro. We're talking about the catcher Jake Rogers. We're talking about Dowell Lugo. These guys have been somewhat impressive, and it's always nice to see. And as an abysmal season like this, it's nice to see young Tigers doing their thing and showing glimpses of what maybe could be the future, because this has been nothing but a depressing season, and we haven't said one good thing about them all year, other than maybe like the first half of Matthew Boyd's season, but so painfully, this thing is coming to an end. Chase, are you excited to see any of these guys come up? I mean, the one guy I'm excited to see is Beau Burrows, just because I want him to get adjusted to the majors sooner than, say, like an Alex Fado or Casey Mize or someone like that, Matt Manning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I share that same opinion. I think Beau Burrows is someone I've been looking forward to see. Obviously an early draft pick, a couple of years ago. So it's one of those guys I really like to see some of the young guys play. I don't really know a whole lot of them because I just don't really follow some of the younger guys in the Tigers organization. But I think it's definitely exciting to see guys like that. Sort of potentially see the future of the Detroit Tigers. I know a lot of teams in Detroit are sort of focusing on that future aspect, and I know. As I enjoy seeing a lot of the future guys play for the Red Wings, so I think I feel very similarly for the Tigers as well. Just seeing, what the future sort of has in store for the Tigers, I think will definitely be exciting, even if it's guys that we've already seen multiple times throughout the season through Demerit and Dawo Lugo and other guys like that.
The Kristen
as much
Stewarts
as
of
we've
the
already
world
seen them
and
already,
such.
yeah.
No, exactly. It is all about the youth. And, while we've talked about the young players, I want to talk about the older players for a bit because, two of the oldest players on the team, Jordan Zimmerman and Miguel Cabrera, I don't necessarily consider them to be the same because Miguel Cabrera, to me, still has some value, even though it's not worth the $30 million that they're paying him. But Jordan Zimmerman is certainly not worth the 20-something million. It might be as high as 27. But any double-digit million number to pay a pitcher like Jordan Zimmerman is just not right, and that's one of the biggest things that's holding the Tigers back from this rebuilding, and why I think the quote-unquote tanking is okay, because Jordan Zimmerman's contract can't be moved. No one will want him, so you just have to wait him out. His next year is the last year of that contract, and I can guarantee you they won't be resigning him. So. The Tigers will have a lot of cap space to kind of sign free agents to plug in where they need. And maybe by September of next year, we'll have seen Casey Mize once, Matt Manning, a couple times, things like that. And we'll start to get an idea of how that starting rotation is actually going to fill out and see, do the Tigers need to add another back-end starter? What position players do they need to? Is Jeimer Candelario not doing what he needs to at third? Maybe they move him a little earlier than people would like to see to still get some value out of his, out of a trade with him, and sign a premier third baseman. Once that money is available, I think the rebuild becomes entirely more accessible because baseball is such a crapshoot in developing the minor leagues because these kids are drafted at 18 sometimes, and we might not see them until they're 23 or 24 realistically. So. Mixing good scouting, good development, and signing strong players is something that the Tigers definitely need, and they unfortunately won't have the ability to do that until guys like Zimmerman are off the books, or if Miguel Cabrera decides to retire. Let's say he decides to retire at the end of next year because he's just, physically worn down and it's getting to him or something like that. That would open $15 million for the Tigers to spend on outstanding players, and hopefully by that time Riley Green has become a good enough hitter, and certain other pieces have. So it's pretty much just a waiting game. It's like everyone makes the joke, it's the Green Day song "Wake Me Up When September Ends" every single year, and I think that applies significantly in Detroit this season. So without belaboring how bad the Tigers have been in their 100-loss season currently, let's move on to our fifth story, which is equally as ridiculous, but it's somewhat amusing to just watch all of this play out over the weekend, over the past week or so. Antonio Brown. Chase, I don't know if you want to give a quick rundown of the things that he's done and the timeline and, what team he started with and where he is now, but a lot has happened.
Yeah, I don't know if I can necessarily give a whole rundown of what he's done because we'd probably be talking for another 2 hours on this podcast. But if I can give a quick rundown, so he was traded by the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 3rd and 5th round pick to the Oakland Raiders. He looked to, be poised to take over a huge chunk of their offense. He looked to be Derek Carr's new number one target after, Amari Cooper was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. But pretty much the drama started in the offseason. He ended up going to, I believe, like cryogenic therapy, and he got frostbite on both of his feet.
Because he didn't wear shoes.
Yeah, because he didn't wear the proper footwear for doing that. And then he ended up getting into, multiple arguments with the NFL about the type of helmet that he wanted to wear. And he, filed disputes multiple times against the NFL and got declined multiple times. And there was just so much drama surrounded around it. It was just pretty unnecessary. But, a lot of people were thinking, well, this is just kind of the, I don't know, even a premier wide receiver such as, Antonio Brown, does he deserve this kind of, this sort of treatment, I guess. I mean, it was just one of those things where it was like, wow, okay, he's
like the helmet thing. He's asking for things that, normal players don't get, and he thinks of himself as so good that he should be the exception to most rules. And,
exactly
that helmet thing extended into him somewhat holding out, and he stopped, I'm not going to go to some of the mandatory things that he had to go to. And then the Raiders fined him, rightfully so, because he's not doing what he's paid to do. And, that turned into this kind of weekend-long back and forth between he said, she said, and, are they going to suspend him because he's, mouthing off? And then you have the confrontation with, I think it's the general manager, right?
Yeah, Mike Mayock. Yeah, he had a confrontation. Apparently, he called him, I think he called him a cracker or something like that. I can't remember. He had a heated confrontation with the GM, and then they were pretty much like, yeah, we're gonna suspend you. And then
is that when he punted the ball and said, fine me for that or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Jeez. He said that, and then
you talk about an attitude problem, and then everyone's assuming, okay, it's over. He's definitely not playing in week 1, let alone the rest of the season. Who knows what's going to happen? Are they going to suspend him for a few weeks or for a couple of weeks? And then, it comes out, I think Gruden said that, or it might have been Mayock, but someone said that, he'll be playing Monday night. Like, everything's okay. So
he released an emotional apology with the captains of the Raiders team, according to an inside source. And Gruden confirmed that he was positive that AB would play on Monday night. And then again, and he was...
We had like 4 hours of silence, and everyone was pretty much on their toes. And then the YouTube video was next, right?
Yeah, so the YouTube video was next. He released, this crazy sort of YouTube video of just, I believe it was phone recordings with John Gruden, and Gruden was just he was like, stop.
Which I can't imagine Gruden agreed to, and if you check the California laws, they need,
he actually said he liked the video. Gruden said he really liked the video.
Well, that's the kind of guy Gruden is, which, Brown is lucky, because if you had less of a happy-go-lucky guy, I think that, you might see some legal action get taken. But was that pretty much the final straw for them?
Yeah, so I believe they ended up finding him like $250,000. I think that was around the sum, which basically meant he forfeited his $30 million in guaranteed money. And basically Antonio Brown was livid after that. He was like, just release me. He was like, cut me after that.
Yeah, he said they took away my money. No way I'm playing for them after that.
Yeah.
I want to be released.
And then the craziest part was they actually went through and released him. I was not expecting them to actually release him. And, he ended up...
I don't think Antonio Brown was expecting them to release him.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I mean, he posted that video, which I think is a little bit staged because, how are you, I don't know. I just feel like it was... for me, my personal opinion is the fact that I just can't believe that the NFL even let this happen. Because if you think about it, I'll kind of get into it in a second. But so he gets released by the Raiders and ends up, so he's free to sign with whatever team. It's not like he's on waivers or anything. He's free to sign with whatever team he wants. And who's the first team that shows up?
Of course, it's Bill Belichick.
It's Bill Belichick and the Patriots. Everyone predicted it. And the crazy thing was the fact that if you remember all the way back to when Antonio Brown was still on the Pittsburgh Steelers and this whole confrontation was going on.
They tried to trade for him.
They tried to trade for him, but the Steelers were like, nope, we're not trading in division, or we're not trading in conference. We're not going to do that. We're not going to trade with
We're not going to trade to another major power within our conference.
That exactly. They were like, forget that. We're not going to do that.
Pit Antonio Brown against the Patriots and say that an AFC, championship right before the Super Bowl. Like it's a smart move, but it did come back to bite them because now I think he's got a $9 million guaranteed contract. I mean, that is a fraction of what he was going to be paid by Oakland. So this is like a huge win for the Patriots if Antonio Brown settles down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I think this is what he wanted all along. I think he will sort of settle down because the thing is now he's on a team that is going to win. I mean, he's basically just chasing a ring at this point. I mean, that I feel like that was sort of his whole plan all along. It's just the fact that, he was going to create, a big mess, and he saw the kind of mess that was Derek Carr and the Raiders offense. They're like, nope, I'm not going to stay here. So he left, and now he basically went, to the
He was just trying to do everything possible
nothing.
to get himself released.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, because essentially, the Raiders sent a 3rd and a 5th round pick to get absolutely nothing, and then the Patriots ended up getting Antonio Brown for free, essentially, which is just insane. I just can't even comprehend that because we already saw.
The craziest part about all of this is that if Antonio Brown does well with Tom Brady as his quarterback, which, I mean, if they get close, if not even on the same page, if they're reading the same book, that will go well enough to get Antonio Brown the contract that he wants next year. And that means that at the end of the day, Antonio Brown wins this entire thing. He dragged us through this entire carnival. I mean, can you, has Hard Knocks started yet?
No, yeah. I mean, Hard Knocks is already done.
Like they need to do a second series on just this.
Of course, he waited for this, for Hard Knocks to end, for this, and we missed this entire drama. It didn't hit any kind of television, which is just, it's just insane that he waited until after the show was over. But it's one of those things that But
once the cameras got off him, he was like, "All right, I'm just gonna go full mental."
Yeah. And the thing is that's upsetting is the fact that he just overshadowed some of the stuff that happened in the offseason. There was a lot of interesting stuff.
His signing with the Patriots was the Julio Jones. Julio Jones signed a 3-year, I think it's $66 million with 64 guaranteed.
Yep, he signed a 3-year extension, and it made him the highest paid, and wide receiver in the NFL.
And wasn't there some question to whether or not Julio Jones would be playing in Week 1 because of that?
Yeah,
holdout
the
a little
quote
bit?
The quote was misconstrued, but yes, he was essentially. I don't really want to speak on specifics about it because, like I said, the quote was not even close to what he actually said. But yeah, according to some sources, the fact that he said that if he hadn't received a new contract, he wasn't going to play. But, whatever. He ended up getting his new contract. He got a lucrative contract, highest paid wide receiver in the NFL currently, and that completely got overshadowed. I don't even remember. I remember seeing the news hours after because everyone was freaking out about the whole Antonio Brown thing, and I just think that's sad, regardless of the fact that how Antonio Brown had whatever season he has, you know what I mean? It's on every comment section on Twitter and Instagram. It's always like, oh, AB, Antonio Brown's a clown, and it's like Antonio Clown and all this other stuff. It's like he's everywhere. He is the most talked about football player right now. It's
it's ironic on a couple of levels because you talk about the Jones deal, right? It's quite possible that the Falcons don't give him, maybe as much guaranteed if they don't see all of this Antonio Brown stuff, and they're just like, oh my God, we need to keep our good receiver happy and just have a good relationship with them after this entire thing broke down with Antonio Brown and the Steelers and then the Raiders and all of that. And then, of course you have the irony that it overshadowed that news anyways, that Antonio Brown is still the most talked about guy, and even though there's something to be said for someone who does it quieter, like Julio Jones, and gets what he wants, that Antonio Brown is still going to be the talk of the town at the end of the day because it seems like in football, more so than any other sport, that the individual athletes have so much power. I mean, okay, maybe basketball. Basketball has that as well, but that's a 5-person team, on the court as opposed to an 11-person team on the court, in 2 different sides of the ball. So it's it's just incredible to me that Antonio Brown will more likely than not come out on top of all of this because his character should be assassinated right now. No one should even want to hear his name, let alone, sign him and give him $9 million. But, here we are. And we know what's going to happen. He's going to win a ring with the Patriots.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing. I mean, if we saw the Patriots' performance tonight, I mean, they absolutely mopped the floor with the Steelers today. And, that was without Antonio Brown. So I can't even imagine their offense with him next week against the Miami Dolphins, who got blown out. I think it was 52-10 against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I heard reports that multiple players have asked for a trade after they felt like the coaching staff has just completely given up on winning this season. Which, yeah. I mean, I have to think one of those is Josh Rosen, right? Like, I think he'd be a good fit in Indianapolis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think he'd be a good fit in a lot of places, and I think that's, the unfortunate part is the fact that, there's a lot of talent there in Miami, and I think it's just being underutilized because it looks like that team is completely tanking, and that's so unfortunate. It's the fact that that team is basically falling apart underneath them. I mean, to get blown out that badly is just, it's so unfortunate. You don't really see a whole lot of tanking in the NFL because it's difficult. It's not really easy to do, but there's a lot of the players believe that's they're just really, there's no effort to try to win football games, and I really think that Miami will have unanimously will have the first overall pick this season. So
yeah, it seems like that. It has been an absolutely crazy weekend, especially the Antonio Brown stuff, but football in general. College football's back. We mentioned that, and we mentioned that. NFL's back. Like, it was just a great 2 days of football, which is something that we really haven't had in a long, long time. So we've gone about 90 minutes. So let's wrap things up at the risk of, going over our already overtime. Chase, before we head out, where can people find you online?
You guys can find me at Chase Sussex on Twitter. That's CHASESUSSEX on Twitter. Or you guys can also follow my Red Wings podcast on Twitter at Hockeytown Rundown, Hockey TWN Run DWN. So that's where you guys can find me.
Yep, and make sure that you follow me at my personal Twitter at David Rosenberg. That's ROSENBERGG, 2 G's. And make sure that you're following our main site's Twitter at Mich Sports Ent. That's at MICH Sports ENT. And of course, engage with us, talk to us at MSE Countdown, where you can find all of our podcasts and information on our upcoming shows. Chase and I will be back next week, hopefully. Right, Chase?
Yep.
Next week. It won't be a month this time, guys.
Yeah.
So hit us up there, MSE Countdown. Thanks so much for listening, and have a good week.
Peace.